Welcome back to the Retire in BC podcast. I'm Ben, and today we're diving into a program that is both incredibly powerful and incredibly misunderstood, the Retirement Disability Savings Plan, or RDSP. If you or someone in your family qualifies for the disability tax credit, the RDSP might be the single most generous government program you'll ever access. And even if you don't currently qualify for the disability tax credit, it's definitely something that's worth looking into because a lot of people qualify but haven't actually accessed it quite yet. But the RDSP can have up to $90,000 of free government money, and the plan can have a huge impact over a lifetime. But there are also strings attached, age limits, complicated withdrawal rules, and a 10-year government clawback that you definitely want to understand before pulling any money out of the plan. So today we're going to walk through the essentials, who qualifies, how the tax credit works, how grants and bonds get paid, and a few planning tips that can help you get the most out of the program.
So let's talk about what an RDSP is. Simple terms, it's a long-term savings plans for individuals with disabilities. It was created to promote long-term financial security for those individuals. Think of it in many cases like a way to make sure that there's something there for your kids when you're not there for them, although it can be used other ways as well. But that's, I think, really what the original intent was, or a way for disabled individuals to save money to provide for themselves later on. What makes it the most generous savings plan out there is that the government adds money through two different programs, disability savings grants and disability savings bonds. The bonds, you actually don't even need to add any money at all, but the grants are matching. The investment growth gets taxed, but it's deferred tax, and so it gets taxed later on, and in the hands of the person pulling it out. So usually taxed at a very low rate. And in total, the government grants and bonds are massive. To give you an example, we've got one client who's put in about $24,000 over the last, I think, 15 years ish. And between that and the government grants and the investment growth, it's worth $213,000 today. That's 24,000 contributed, worth 213,000. And that's largely due to that free government money, matching it or putting it in.
Yeah, well, the government money is just so huge. And then the other thing is, I mean, we'll talk about how it's a long-term savings plan. We'll talk about it in terms of that maybe being kind of a restriction that you don't want to pull out money early. But I think the other way of viewing that is actually as, that's a boon, that's a benefit. In many ways, I think we as financial planners would be happy if some plans, if clients couldn't access them sooner and they all were long-term savings plans like that. And so, yeah, just the government or the own contributions being the smallest portion, the government contributions being a much larger portion, and then the investment growth being a much larger portion beyond that because it's been invested for, in this case, about 20 years, but in many cases, 20, 30, 40 years before you start to even pull it out. So, yeah.
So before we get into the weeds of who's eligible and all of that, I think I find it useful to sort of think big picture. And so if you're thinking about whether you're eligible or not, the way that we want you to think about these plans is very long term, 30 years. Think in terms of putting the money in small amounts. We'll talk about the amounts, but small amounts for 20 years, letting it sit there for 10 more, and then taking it out bit by bit by bit over the rest of your life or the life of your child. If you sort of wrap your head around that idea, sort of like a pension plan or an RSP for disability individuals, that's how they work best. That's how the government set them up to work. And so they do work best that way. But there are some other ways you can take advantage of them.
Yeah, definitely. And to highlight that too, or just to go back to what you touched on before with qualifying for them, really there's one piece, and that's whether or not you qualify, whether or not you get the disability tax credit. If you get the DTC, then you're eligible to open an RDSP. But I just like to pause there and because some people aren't getting the DTC. And I just like to pause and say, maybe you should consider applying for it because there are so many Canadians who qualify, but they just don't currently get the DTC, whether that's because they don't understand it, they don't currently pay much in taxes, so they don't think the tax credit is worth it, or it's because the form is confusing. It's estimated that there are between 500,000 to 1 million Canadians who qualify for the tax credit, but who are not currently receiving it. And so we're talking mostly about the RDSP here. Even beyond that, the disability tax credit is usually worth applying for most people. But in this case, especially because it's the main barrier to getting an RDSP, we really think that most people, or at least most people under the age of 49, should be qualifying or applying for that. More or less what that takes to qualify for is you have to have some kind of impairment in physical or mental function, has to restrict, they call it the basic activities of daily living. That doesn't mean it needs to be crazy severe to qualify. But if you're having trouble, walking or eating or seeing, or sometimes it's just the mental functions. So there are a lot of not just physical disabilities, but mental disabilities that will allow people to qualify. They can get on the list. And then really it's just, not something you can go apply for on your own. You have to have a qualified medical practitioner apply on your behalf. And so I think that's kind of the other reason that not too many people end up getting the tax credit. You have to get your practitioner involved. They have to submit the forms. They might not understand it super well themselves. And unless you have a strong understanding of what it is and why you should qualify, sometimes you have to really be an advocate for yourself.
Well, and we can refer people to, we've got some organizations that help people with those forms. And I really want to highlight um, oftentimes, and I'll give you a real life example of this too, but it's surprising sometimes how small a disability can be and you can still qualify. And the government's actually made it easier. Maybe you applied 5 years ago. There have been some cases where, particularly people with autism, they've made it easier for them to be eligible for that. But real life example, I had a client, I had never met his wife, and very savvy guy. Um, One day we're talking, and I find out that his wife is legally blind. She can see, but she is legally blind. She was visually impaired. I, she was a little bit below the age of 49. So I knew that our DSPs weren't going to be that valuable for her, but we could take advantage of them for 1 or 2 years. I think she was 47, if I remember right. But um, I said, apply for that. Well, he applies or she applies for the disability tax credit, gets back, I believe it was about $15,000 because the the doctor said, well, the government will only go back 10 years on this stuff, but the doctor said she's been blind for, 15, 20 years, whatever it is. The government went back 10 years, applied the disability or gave her that disability tax credit for that. Whatever she couldn't use on her income, it could be transferred over to him. There's a lot of, so even if you're not making any money, that credit can be transferred to quite a few different family members. And so not so then she got 15 grand right off the bat, or they did as a family. Then, in addition to that, we were able to take advantage of the RDSP only for a couple of years, but still, it was very beneficial. And that's a case of somebody really savvy, just not cluing in. So you may be in that boat, no harm in that, but apply if you think there's a possibility, or ask your doctor to fill out those forms. You don't have to do most of the applications.
Yeah, well, even if it is just a couple of years like that, we'll talk about it in a bit, but there's a 10-year catch-up rule as well. So you can potentially be getting thousands or tens of thousands of free government money in just in a short time period. So can be worthwhile to do, definitely. We have both now mentioned the number 49, age 49. You actually can open an RDSP up till age 60, but those government grants and bonds, those stop at age 49. And then, typically we'll also talk about there's a 10-year clawback period if you were to withdraw. So typically people are then leaving it open until age 59, 60 before they start to withdraw. There can be some reasons in between the ages of 49 to 60 where it still is appropriate to open an RDSP and put the money in. You just won't get any government grants for doing so. But yeah, just thought I'd mention that quickly.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. You kind of want prior to, or if you're younger, you kind of want 30 grand that you can put into the plan. We'll explain why later, but you're allowed to put up to 200,000 in the plan, but you really get big grants, especially if you're a low income earner, on that first $30,000. So if you come into a big windfall because you got hit by a car and you're disabled, but you get a big payout, you may not want to put all $200,000 into the plan right away. You may want to hold some of it back so you can put it in bit by bit and get that government grant money. So yeah, as Ben said, they're complicated, but they're awesome.
Yeah, yeah. And so what those come down to in terms of the free government money, really it comes down into two big buckets. There's the Canada Disability Savings Grant, CDSG, and the same thing, but the bond, the CDSB. I would think of those as the CDSG, the grant, is the matching component. You have to put some money in, or the beneficiary has to put some money in. Someone has to put money in to get the government grant. The bond, no one has to put money in. You just have to be a lower income family to qualify for that. But we'll talk about both. To start with is the grant money, that matching component. That's kind of the bigger component of it, because you can get up to 70,000 of that money in there for the grant. Essentially, what will happen is the government will match your contributions either 3-1, 2-1, or 1-1 on money that goes in, effectively depending on the family income, on how high the income is. So if it's a lower income family, essentially the family puts in 1,500, so 1,500. The first 500 gets matched 3-1. The next 1,000 in a year gets matched 2-1. And so you've put in 1,500, the government puts in 4,500, it becomes 6,000 just in that 1 year alone. If there's catch up available, you can do that multiple times and catch up even faster. But it's a phenomenal way to just absolutely balloon your deposits pretty much right away. It takes a month or two for the grant to come in, but immediate return there, and then that whole amount can get invested and grow even further. Even if you're a higher income earning family, and there's no limit to this, you are still getting 1-1 matching on funds into the plan. So $1,000 becomes $2,000 just from depositing that into that, up to a limit, right? Up to a limit of 3,500 per year. But yeah.
Well, it would be up to a limit of 1,000 per year if you're only eligible for the 1-1 matching.
Right.
Although,
Yeah.
actually, to complicate it even further, you can get caught up 1 year at a time, right? So, well, actually, no, it's even more complicated than that. The government sends you a letter. Actually,
Yeah.
that's one nice thing, right? The government sends you a letter that says, "Here's how much you could get, and here's what you should contribute if you've registered for the disability tax credit, and if you have an RDSP." Maybe not. Maybe even if you don't have an RDSP. Actually, we've
Yeah.
had clients who get the letter even just because they've got the disability tax credit. So that's the key thing, right?
Yeah, and I think that's probably, I mean, we're talking about, oh, complicated this grant bond, how much you can get in. At the end of the day, Arnold's right. It's wait for your annual statement of grant
That's right.
entitlement.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that will tell you exactly that. Typically, those come out in February or March, sometime early on in the year, and it'll say, put in this much, you can get that much. And that's kind of
And
the
let
best
us
place to
worry
bet.
about all the
Let
rest.
us worry about
You
this.
don't
Yeah,
have to do it.
exactly.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
And so then that other component is the Canada Disability Savings Bond. That's where just if you're a lower income earning family, up to $1,000 per year will just be put into the RDSP on your behalf. And I like to actually really highlight this point is that family income, once a beneficiary turns 18, typically their family income is just their own. So even where we have a case with, a couple and they're a fairly high income earning couple and they've got a child, well, as soon as that child hits 18, they're usually just having their own income. Most often, they're a student or they're lower income for whatever reason. And then all of a sudden they are qualifying for this bond and also for the higher matching.
Yeah, yeah. So we've got lots of cases actually where people for a certain period of time are getting one-to-one matching, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's
Yeah,
great,
exactly. Yeah.
But then when the child turns the age of majority, all of a sudden they're getting this 3-for-1, 2-for-1 matching plus the extra bond. I mean, again, I mean, that's why 24,000 turned into 214,000 for that other example, right? Like just it's crazy. We
Mhm.
love these things.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's great. We love them, we love them, we love them, but a couple of considerations, just things to watch out for. We have already highlighted, think of these as long-term plans. They're not there to put money in, get government grant, and then pull it out to buy a car. They are supposed to be retirement plans. They're supposed to be in there for a long time. To that end, there is something called the 10-year clawback, essentially just meaning that anything you pull out, the government grants for the past 10 years are subject to being clawed back if you make any redemptions. And so that's why, typically speaking, we're collecting the government grant up to age 49 because that's when you're eligible. Then we're waiting 10 years so as not to trigger the 10-year clawback. And then we start to pull out at age 59, age 60, so that we're not incurring any of those penalties. Right.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. So again, back to the whole idea of think about it like a very long-term thing. It's very onerous to pull the money out earlier. So wrap your head around that from day one.
yeah, onerous to pull it out early, and then even later on, because these are so generous of a program, there are some pretty fiddly rules around withdrawing it. Not that that's
Right.
necessarily a bad thing. Again, for the most part, you're just going to end up getting income. A lot of people are familiar with, retire RIF income or locked in income, things like that. But these ones, they are essentially most of the time we see you're just following a formula that the government sets. This is both your minimum and your maximum amount. You're not supposed to pull out more or less than that, especially in the case where if it's a primarily government assisted plan, just meaning the government has put in more money than you have, which is usually the case, then it's very restrictive on the amount you can get out. If it's not one of those, to Arnold's point earlier, if it's one that you've just put in the 200, you're up to your full amount, the 200 grand, and not gotten any government grant, then it's a lot more flexible in terms of how much you can pull out. But I would tend to think of it as when you hit age 59, there is going to be a set dollar amount that you have to start withdrawing from the plan. Um, we can always talk about individual circumstances with clients, but for the generalized, for the most part, that's more or less how it works.
Well, and there are some provisions for cases where there's shortened life
For
expectancy
sure,
and
yeah.
things like that. Like the government's not for, I have to say, actually, similar to education savings plans, the government has over time improved these and added things and made them better year after year after year. And one of those was putting in place something that, in the case of shortened life expectancy, there's a faster withdrawal mechanism. So, that's kind of nice. The other point, actually, now that I'm just talking about improvements that they've made, um, not about withdrawals, but about who can own the plans. When a child is under the age of majority, the parent opens up the plan for them. Typically, once they hit the age of majority, if the child has capacity, if they've got the ability, contractual capacity, then the child takes the plan over. We have seen some instances where there's been a concern about whether they do have contractual capacity or not, and parents have wanted to maintain control. And frankly, the government hasn't figured it out yet, and they're just sort of allowing the parents to maintain them, even though technically the legislation indicates that they shouldn't. And so they are working on improving that on every year. So don't let any of that stuff hang you up. If you or one of your children, or actually if any of your family members are eligible, talk to them about this stuff. Look at getting one set up and forget about the rules. Just come see us, come see somebody. We were one of the very first people to get heavily involved in these things, so we understand them very, very well, and we've developed some relationships with organizations that help people apply for them. So do not let all the finicky rules get you hung up. Let us look after that for you.
Yeah, well, and good point about who can hold it. I wanted to make another point too on who can contribute, because it's not
Ah,
as though only the plan holder is allowed to contribute to their own RDSP. And in fact, we've done this many times, is to have other people contribute with the written permission of the plan holder, of course. But in our case, we have a family member who is disabled, and we will frequently, once per year, just ask around, would anyone like to donate to this family member's RDSP this year, collect some money, and then that's a nice way of kind of having everyone feel involved in then okay, we've all made this little deposit, or it's worked out to a fair amount for the whole family, but then that gets multiplied so many times by the government grant and then multiplied so many times by the investment growth that that's a really nice feel good way of doing things, and doesn't have to be this beneficiary who the disabled family member who can't work obviously wouldn't be able to contribute to their own RDSP. It's a nice way for the family to be able to support them.
yeah, yeah, and actually, we periodically encourage people when we look at situations to do exactly that because it is a great thing to do for them. Uh, I think another important thing to point out, and this was designed this way on purpose, when they first looked at creating RDSPs, the government, now I forget the name of the organization, but they partnered with an organization to talk about what the challenges of these kinds of programs are. And one of the biggest ones that came out was, well, every time, there's a benefit for the disabled person, it affects some other means tested program that they have. And so most of Canada, not all, unfortunately, and again here it's a little bit complicated, but for most of Canada, and BC's the case here, anything that gets pulled out of that disability program doesn't affect any means tested programs at all. It gets taxed,
Mhm.
the growth on it gets taxed, the internal growth, but it doesn't affect means tested programs. There are a few provinces where it's a 50% of it affects their means tested programs. I don't believe there are any that are 100%. I think it's just there are three, I think, in one territory that affect it 50-50. But here in BC, you pull out $100, it does not, 100 does not come out of anything else that you got. And that's because the government was wise in consulting with some disability groups and recognizing that that was a big disincentive to save.
Yeah, well, and it's like the contributions themselves aren't taxed, right? So it's your money that you've
Right,
put in
right.
yourself that doesn't then later get taxed again. It's only the government growth and or sorry, the government grant and the growth that eventually get taxed. So
But that is
um
going to be the biggest chunk,
but that
right?
is
I
going to
mean,
be the biggest chunk. Yeah,
realistically,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Yeah, true, true. So, yeah, no, we absolutely love RDSPs. Like Arnold said, we were one of the first providers of doing those, and they're near and dear to our heart, obviously, with this other family member that we contribute for. So, yeah, definitely, if you know anyone with a disability, just feel free to send a link to this episode or just ask them if they are aware that an RDSP exists, that up to 90,000 of government benefits might be on the table for them, plus obviously investment growth. So,
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Retire in BC podcast. The RDSP is one of those rare programs where the government genuinely tries to stack the deck in your favor, but only if you understand the rules well enough to take advantage of them. If you're supporting a family member with a disability or you qualify for the disability tax credit yourself, it's worth taking a really close look at whether the RDSP should be part of your long-term plan. The grants, the bonds, the tax deferred growth, they add up in a way few other programs can match. As always, if you have questions about the RDSP, the disability tax credit, or how these pieces fit into your broader financial or estate planning, feel free to reach out. And if you found this helpful, consider subscribing or leaving a review. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.
Thanks. Bye. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast may not necessarily reflect those of IPC Securities Corporation or IPC Investment Corporation. The information provided is for informational and entertainment purposes only and should not be construed as financial, legal, or tax advice. The hosts and creators of this podcast assume no liability for actions taken based on the content discussed.